handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Ziad, over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Ziad out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress. Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2 1. Grid to mark. Mike Charlie, 4 7 tree 9er 8 9er out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck, 2 rounds AGBT, gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Denise Simon Experience, heard worldwide on Mojo 50. Thanks for being with us. The one case that still, in my world, just burns a hole through my belly is the whole confirmation process on Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. And I have the distinct pleasure of having with us Ryan Lovelace, who is, gosh, a brand new book, actually, Search and Destroy Inside the Campaign Against Brett Kavanaugh, which you can find, ladies and gentlemen, over there at Amazon.com. And, you know, if you push the little button and order it, it's delivered to you in like a day and a half. So it's right there at your door. And congratulations, Mr. Ryan Lovelace, for the book, and thanks for being with us on the Denise Simon Experience.
Well, thank you, and thanks for having me.
You know, you've got some real experience kind of covering these legal topics, you know, looking at cases that go through the court system, and you've reported on Supreme Court stuff before. I mean, that's kind of what your resume is concentrated on. So you are, I would say, certainly one of the go-to people when it comes about this certain topic here. But what they really did to Brett Kavanaugh, I can't get over. I don't think and I'm not sure I ever want to get over it. I just want to stay mad. Are you mad? I'm mad.
Well, more than anything, I'm puzzled. You know, I want to know more than what we knew at the time. And that was really what I was trying to do in Search and Destroy, was kind of uncover that truth. Because all along I've been told as a reporter that the truth here is unknowable. We'll never know what actually happened. And I just don't think that's the case. You know, in looking at it, in looking at Christine Blasey Ford's story about a year ago now this fall, you know, when she came forward, she was saying she couldn't say where exactly this happened, this allegation of sexual assault. She couldn't say when. She couldn't say any of these things. She could say what, but she was the only one who could. No one else could corroborate it. So when I knew the why was starting to change too, because when I heard her say that the why was all about her civic duty, the reason why she was bringing this forward was all about her civic duty, and her attorney said Christine Blasey Ford was ambivalent. Then when I heard that start to change in the aftermath of these hearings in private, when her attorney Deborah Katz said that she was motivated, Christine Blasey Ford was motivated in part by Roe versus Wade and right to an abortion, then I knew there were some other things that needed looking into.
Yeah, this is all kind of I think the timing was almost perfect to kind of inject it into the whole Me Too movement, correct?
It was. And, you know, that was one of the really interesting things about this and what made this Supreme Court nomination different from ones in the past. You know, with the Me Too movement being what it was, Deborah Katz, Christine Blasey Ford's attorney, said when she has cases like this, you know, with the kind of Me Too aspect of it, she's basically looking to try them in the court of public opinion as opposed to a court of law. She says that she doesn't look to the law for clients like this. She has to have a press strategy, a legislative strategy, and use organized forces in the nonprofit sector to accomplish what her client's agenda is. And in this case, it was a political agenda, and she admitted as much. But what we've really seen for the first time here is kind of this organized push from the left that built from before Judge Kavanaugh's nomination all the way through to his confirmation hearings. You know, it stacked up against him, and they had a plan in place all along.
Ryan, had it not been Brett Kavanaugh, I'm of the notion that they had a working operation ready to launch regardless of who the nominee was. Would that be about Would that be about right?
That's correct. They had some things in place that they didn't even have 1 year earlier with Justice Gorsuch's nomination. One thing in particular was Demand Justice. Demand Justice is a dark money group on the left, and they formed in the aftermath of all of Justice Gorsuch's hearings and right ahead of Justice Kennedy's retirement. And then when Justice Kennedy retired, they said, we're going to spend $5 million no matter who President Trump picks. And they're led by Hillary Clinton's former campaign flack, Brian Fallon. And he didn't even quite so much care that they actually succeeded in taking down whoever Trump picked. What he said at the time was, we need to build the muscle memory to organize around the courts so that we can flex that muscle in the future when we need to, and in getting out voters in 2020. He knew it was about the next election and the next moment so that it could fundraise and build and organize the left so that we could expand the court and do other things that the left wants to do to try to delegitimize and undermine the authority and credibility of the Supreme Court.
Based on your resume and the kind of investigative work that you do, I'm of the notion that you pretty much have a working outline on how and where to start these kinds of investigations. So, not to say that it was easy, but you knew the first 5 or 6 things to do to begin to build this case to write this book. Would that be right?
It is. And, I've really been covering, especially in the Trump era, the president's Supreme Court shortlist since the earliest days of his campaign. Now, I was a campaign reporter first, and then after his election and, inauguration, I moved over to the Supreme Court beat and was really following, is he going to nominate, is President Trump going to nominate someone who is an originalist and textualist in the mold of Justice Scalia, as he had said during the campaign, because that was really a top issue for so many conservatives that voted for him. And in following this all the way through, when we got to Judge Kavanaugh's nomination, and then Christine Blasey Ford coming forward in September of last year, I listened to Deborah Katz, the attorney for Christine Blasey Ford, come out on the day that this allegation about an incident surfaced. That's what it was called at the time on a blog named The Intercept, an allegation about an incident. And I saw that she was testifying on the House side in a different committee, and she was talking about the Weinstein effect. And she said, the Washington Post just doesn't care anymore if you don't rape 80 people. And I thought that was odd because I didn't know what she might have been specifically referring to. But later when I saw Christine Blasey Ford's encrypted messages to the Washington Post in July, and then telling the Washington Post, I'll go to New York Times or Senators, I've been advised to go to others if you're not going to talk to me, then I realized that, that was a reaction and perhaps to that Christine Blasey Ford had tried to go to the Post and they didn't listen to her at first. And that was one of the reasons why I think that frustration really sort of piqued my interest, because it showed the way in which the compliant media didn't at first buy into it, but then once the allegations started to trade up the chain, so to speak, in this new media and social media environment, it really took off. And that's kind of where I sort of began that investigation and began looking into all of these things to see whether or not we were all being sold the bill of goods.
In part of the testimony that Brett Kavanaugh gave, there was a sentence or maybe two where he referred to Clinton, and I'm not going to say what it was because I'll get the words screwed up, but he just injected that in there, and it was just kind of in my world left there as the 600-pound gorilla in the room. But there turned out to be some truth to that. Can you help us with that?
Absolutely. That was one of the things when he came out at the end of September at those hearings and gave a very impassioned, speech. I think a lot of folks were wondering that had not seen him ever before. Why is he? That doesn't seem to be the disposition of a judge. And what's he talking about the Clintons about? Well, there were a few things there. He had worked in President Bush's administration in the White House. He was well known in Washington. He was a law clerk at the Supreme Court. He worked in big law, the biggest law firms in D.C., and he also had been part of Ken Starr's investigation. So he was familiar with those folks then. And in examining the legal team and the advisors growing in number around Christine Blasey Ford throughout the summer into the fall of last year, there were folks from the Clinton administration that joined her team. Michael Bromwich was someone who had worked in the Clinton administration and then was prepping her for the hearings. There were advisors from a Democratic firm in town, a Democratic PR firm named SKD Knickerbocker that sent folks over, people that involved in Anita Hill hearings, and Brian Fallon, as I already mentioned. There are many folks with ties to the Clintons that were still mad about the last election and were still mad about Justice Gorsuch's selection. That was the whole point of this to so many on the left, in their own words. as they put it, they say Justice Gorsuch sits in a stolen seat that belongs to Merrick Garland,
right.
President Obama's pick. And now with Justice Kavanaugh, they're saying, well, there has to be an asterisk next to his name. If public confidence and faith in the institution of the Supreme Court can be undermined by people who tell you two of the justices that Trump picked and whoever Trump picks are delegitimized, then all of a sudden the whole system starts to crumble if people lose faith, because then if lower judges do, all kinds of different things could start happening and hell breaking loose.
Well, I think in some cases, somebody probably got to Brian Fallon and said, Brian, we need you to do some things here because, you know, Brett Kavanaugh, because of, you know, he's been around Washington, D.C., as just summarized. He knows a lot of the machinery, the political machinery. And I would argue, knows more details about cases and events that either saw the light of legalness or never reached that point. But it's almost as I guess what I'm trying to say, he knows where some bodies are buried. And maybe some of these Democrats were afraid of that whole component. Is that a possibility?
It's definitely a possibility, and I think there's a lot of truth to it. You know, in addition to being Hillary Clinton's former campaign flack, he was also the top communications person at the Justice Department under then Attorney General Eric Holder. And before that, he had been an aide to Chuck Schumer. So he knew well the Senate. He knows the way the Justice Department works with doing judicial nominations, and he knows presidential politics too. And he knows how all of those things fit together around Supreme Court nominations. And really, so many on the left do, and understood it in a way that the right wasn't prepared for and wasn't expecting this time. You know, that's really one of those things when we see Deborah Katz saying this is about a press strategy and a legislative strategy. That's what she's talking about. It's all about litigating a case like this in the court of public opinion. Because there's never any intention of actually going to a court of law.
So it's a political chess game, and we little people out here outside the Beltway that don't know this machinery. I mean, we have snippets of what it's like. I would argue that what we know is probably a deck chair off the Titanic, but it's really exponentially so much worse than we can possibly know. And those on the left and those on the right, it becomes a real political warfare. And it was kind of like who can outsmart who and use the press to do it.
Right,
correct?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of the things that I try to reveal in Search and Destroy are so many of those things that folks outside the Beltway aren't privy to. You know, as a reporter covering the hearings, the first set of hearings before Christine Blasey Ford came forward, there were all these protesters that were constantly screaming every time a Republican would start talking. And the public was led to believe that that was organic, that these were people who showed up who were very concerned about Judge Kavanaugh.
Yeah.
But what I found in my own reporting was that these folks had their own PR firm called Megaphone Strategies, and it's a social justice PR firm. And one of the things that they do was every time someone was hauled out of the they would email us as reporters and say, there have now been this many folks arrested. Would you like to talk to so-and-so who's just been arrested? Piper Perabo, a celebrity actress, has been arrested. Would you like to talk to her? And they were constantly notifying us and updating us so they could help create the sense of chaos in all of our stories that would appear online, in print, and on television, so that people that aren't in D.C. or aren't able to follow 4 days of hours of hearings would only see those images and hear those things. And as a reporter, I think it's really important to explain when that is something that's organized and people aren't seeing it and exactly who is orchestrating it. Because that PR firm is something that was founded by Van Jones. It's, a whole aim is about social justice, as so much of this push was.
You reporters must have phones that just blow up all the time. I mean, even we can watch some things, when people are talking on the air and we can, they forgot to put their phone on silent and their phones are blowing up. And, the emails that you guys are subscribing to, I don't know how you can wade through the blast of events and stuff and people and this person said this and that. Probably by the hour, Ryan. I mean, you guys have to be a little overwhelmed, aren't you? To the point where you guys have to prioritize what you put out?
It does. It does definitely get overwhelming at times. And, that was one of the things in this book. I fortunately was able to uncover some of the private emails of Deborah Katz, Christine Blasey Ford's attorney, to both Senate Democrats and to Senate Republicans. And I quote from them in the book, and they haven't been published before, but I know that folks are going to say, oh, this is taken out of context or that's taken out of context. So what I went ahead and did was I just published the full thing in the back of the book so folks can read it for themselves and decide for themselves if they think it's in the proper context, and also so they can't be accused of that. Because like you're saying, when there's a document dump of overwhelming amount of information, it's difficult to sift through it. So I did the work of sifting through it, but I also wanted to give people themselves the opportunity to do it, because I know so many people in my industry just try to filter things for their own political purposes. And that's kind of why I was looking to provide information and not affirmation in all of this.
Back to what they did to Kavanaugh, search and destroy. Did you imagine when you were, compiling and researching for the book that the choreography of all of this was as big as it was?
I didn't quite expect the scope. Going into this, I expected a similar process of advice and consent that had played out before to play out again. I expected it to be bruising. I expected it, though, to follow in the mold of when the Senate rejected Merrick Garland, who was President Obama's pick, and confirmed Justice Gorsuch, who was President Trump's. But then really as things started to turn and get heated over the summer and into the fall, and I saw some of the machinery come together, and even how it was different from Justice Gorsuch's nomination, hours before Justice Kavanaugh, then Judge Kavanaugh, was picked as the nominee, there were folks outside the Supreme Court with professionally printed signs. Before before Justice Gorsuch's, they had signs, but they were handwritten, scrawled on big cardboard. This time it had a professional sheen. There was much more money involved this time. There were many more actors. And part of that was because it became personal faster. And it became personal faster because the political tools of the left disappeared after they failed to negate Justice Gorsuch's confirmation. It's easy to look back now, I think, and sort of comparatively view that one as smoother than this one. But actually, he experienced the first partisan filibuster of a Supreme Court nominee ever. Democrats tried to shut down the whole thing and say President Trump doesn't get to pick a Supreme Court nominee. And after they did that and pulled that gunshot, Republicans nuked the filibuster, said we're not doing that anymore. And then the left went to even more personal ends to try to stop then Judge Kavanaugh from moving forward.
I'm thinking the takeaway that you want the readers to embrace when they finish your book is understand the big picture here. It's almost as though your book is a public service. It's teaching us lessons in how to, look at a headline, read an article, see what's missing, and how to ask some other questions and where to necessarily go find those answers. Is that some of us your motivation?
I think that's right. I learned so many things during this process that I think if other people had the opportunity to learn what I learned, it could be so useful and valuable in sussing out some of what's fake news and what's actually fact. I learned to look out for when something starts trading up the chain. When Christine Blasey Ford first approached the Washington Post, they didn't touch her story because they didn't have anything to corroborate it with. But after we had this incident, an allegation alleging an incident, appear on a blog post on The Intercept, then Dianne Feinstein, the senator from California, came out and said, oh, yeah, I've heard about that. And then once she acknowledged it, that was enough to confirm it for folks like me in the national press and say, well, we don't actually have to get to the truth of whether or not what it says is true or false or whatever. We just have to talk about how does it help him? How does it hurt him? Does it change things? And then cable news does the same. And that's something that didn't exist before. Justice Thomas, when he dealt with the Anita Hill hearings, didn't have to deal with that kind of immediate environment. Going back to Judge Bork many years earlier, similarly didn't have that sort of thing going on. But that's the way it works now, and that's the way presidential politics works. And now judges are wising up to that too. But when I started to watch that and recognize that and read some of the behind-the-scenes emails and talk to people on the inside and watched all that develop, I knew that if people understood what I was hearing from these folks, they would be able to recognize these things for themselves and then know when they're listening to people in the news and in the press and in the media, whether or not they're lying to them or actually trying to tell them the truth.
Or pick up on some target words that we need to take and run with.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Is there unfinished business, Ryan, when it comes to all things in the confirmation hearing for Justice Kavanaugh? I mean, I was so happy just to hear you mention Senator Feinstein, because I think she got a big pass when she didn't deserve one. And then there's a couple of criminal referrals. So don't we have some still open wounds that still have not been addressed?
We do. There are several outstanding criminal referrals to folks who have even admitted making up allegations against Justice Kavanaugh. Senator Feinstein, it's interesting. People wanted to know about how the letter moved, that private allegation. And that's one of the things I get to in this book is I publish a private email from Christine Blasey Ford's attorney to Senator Feinstein's staff authorizing the letter to be shared with Republicans. And they only authorized the letter to be moved after they talked to the press, after she talked to me, Deborah Katz, the attorney, talked to me, after she talked to CNN, and after Christine Blasey Ford talked to the Post. When you're talking to the press before you're talking to the committee, I think that really shows where your intent is. It shows, why would you go to the press instead of the committee if you're actually going the civic route? And then beyond those things, there are still other things that are, revealed for the first time in this book that could lead to further investigation. I've heard Senator Tillis say, he's from North Carolina and is on the Judiciary Committee, that he thinks there's some material here that warrants further investigation by the committee. So if that happens, I think then we'd really be able to get to the bottom of whether there was anyone involved in this process that perjured themselves, as Deborah Katz in her, comments about Roe versus Wade being involved in this seemed to suggest.
This has been a learning, you already had a pretty robust, a pretty stout resume in the work that you have done leading into, writing the book. And again, thank you for doing the book. We absolutely need to, get it some traction here. But not only are we going to learn something, but how much did you learn, too, that you're going to apply to the next case and the next case?
Oh, I learned so much. One of the things that I was not expecting to learn here was just how all of this happens outside of a courtroom. When I went through and spent months reading through Deborah Katz's, private emails, listening to her speeches, talking to her adversaries who never make it to a courtroom, I was surprised at how much of her legal strategy involves never, ever getting to a courtroom. As a lawyer, you think they'd be going to a courtroom.
No.
But that's not what it's about at all. And, it was really interesting when Republicans were telling me, Michael Avenatti was one of the biggest things that helped Republicans and conservatives stay together on this. If you look at the differences, not just his crazy antics, but his actual legal strategy, Christine Blasey Ford never appeared on national television on camera alone. She was always flanked by her attorneys, and she never faced an adversarial question. Always sympathetic questioners, Democrats, and then for Republicans, it was Rachel Mitchell just proceeding, lightly and friendly through her questioning. But Michael Avenatti's client, his accuser, Julie Swetnick, that was accusing Judge Kavanaugh of, crazy teenage gang rape parties, she had to sit down alone on national television with NBC, an investigative reporter who didn't have the same pressure to believe the woman, because all she had to say was, I'm doing my job, I'm a reporter, and I'm just asking questions.
Yeah, right.
And it quickly crumbled. And I think that's one of those things where it explains why the left succeeded with Christine Blasey Ford at doing so much damage where they didn't with other accusers.
Woo, Ryan Lovelace. Ladies and gentlemen, please grab this book, Search and Destroy: Inside the Campaign Against Brett Kavanaugh. We learned some lessons on how to do some research back during the Obama administration, but I think that the left has taken it to a plateau. I shouldn't call it a plateau because I don't think that they're finished, but whatever's sitting on this top shelf on their operations, their choreography, who they enlist, who they pay, who they contact. I mean, even when we talk about this whole Russia collusion campaign, that had obviously international implications. So it's really kind of a limitless, it has no boundaries mission of search and destroy. So your title, I think, can be applied in so many, so much chaos and so much scandal in Washington, D.C., correct?
Yes, I think so. And I really think it's important, that we all do take the time to try to kind of understand some of this stuff, because it's so much of it gets swept under the rug and tried to be brushed off and moved on from. But I do think it's important. So, thanks so much for, your interest in it too.
Well, I mean, we're overwhelmed out here. I don't know about you. We're a little overwhelmed out here. We're at a saturation point, but we can't let it get to us to the point where, we're almost numb. I mean, we can't get to that point. I mean, there are days that we are. I'm sure you are too. But Ryan Lovelace, Search and Destroy, found on Amazon.com. Mr. Ryan Lovelace, thanks so much for all your work and being with us. And I'm going to tap you on the shoulder again because I have a feeling your good work's not finished.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I look forward to it.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way on the Denise Simon Experience, so stay with us. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us on the Denise Simon Experience, heard worldwide on Mojo 50. You know, here we are passing in a time in September, which I would argue is a tough month for an awful lot of people for an awful lot of reasons. You know, people are going back to school. Parents are kind of in a panic. We've had two significant events that have happened in our recent history in September, least of which is the attacks of 9/11. And sadly, it always seems the World Trade Center gets the bulk of the attention when not many people pay attention to or give some discussion on what happened in Shanksville, the Pentagon, or 7 years ago, Benghazi. And I've got the pleasure of having a friend, a previous guest on the Denise Simon Experience, Michael Ingmire with us. Michael is the uncle of our once with us, Sean Smith, who perished in the attacks of Benghazi. And, you know, thank you, Michael, for kind of keeping this flame burning. I kind of watched an awful lot of social media on September the 11th, and I was really very disappointed at not only how people were responding to it, but what wasn't there to respond to. Did you find that same thing, Michael?
Yeah, but I do have as far as social media, I have a retinue of people that really are passionate still about accountability. We all know what happened. We all know why it happened, you know. But what all of us share is the same premise, that we have yet to see accountability. Mm-hmm. And even in the sense the past year, from basically the spring of 2018 till very recently, till about 12 weeks ago, we're finding that even when they do capture some of the terrorists that were directly responsible, you know, for the murder of my nephew and Ambassador Stevens and Doherty and Woods, that the sentences handed down are ridiculous. And I've approached President Trump by email. I've approached President Trump by way of an open letter. I've approached President Trump by another article where I asked him to release all the Benghazi documents. And I also, most passionately in regards to these recent terrorist trials, want the shift to be focused to a military tribunal structure. We cannot objectively give credence to these guys. You know, they don't deserve the same civil rights as you and I do. You know, it's patently ridiculous. So we have a judge in Washington and Federal District Court by the name of Christopher Cooper. Okay, now, and he sentenced last year Abu Khatallah to 22 years in prison. That's federal time. That's not a joke. It's 95% of the sentence. But the problem I'm having is then we have a trial with Mustafa al-Aman, who's also a real heavyweight as far as the Benghazi attack. So this leads me to believe that we have a twofold problem here. One, you cannot try these guys in criminal court. They need to be tried under a military tribunal structure. They need to face that form of justice. And with Mustafa, they had 17 charges against him, including murder. And I was kind of pumped about that because I said, okay, maybe at last we're going to get something. So what do? They basically they become deadlocked. Mm-hmm. I mean, who picked this jury, first of all, and who are these jurors that they become deadlocked so that Christopher Cooper declares a mistrial on 15 of the 17 charges. So Mustafa has been found guilty of 2 charges. And I have a real distinct problem, maybe it's a personal thing, I don't know, with the Justice Department and the Victims Advocate Office. Because my question when they declared a mistrial is real simple. Are you going to retry him on the 15 charges that, you were deadlocked on? And I've yet to get an answer. The prosecuting attorney for the U.S. Attorney's Office was Karen Seaford. Karen Seaford gave me short shrift. She turned me over to the Victims Advocate Office. I've dealt with the Victims Advocate Office of the Justice Department before. I think they're better suited to perhaps dealing with children, And they've yet to give me an answer whether they're going to retry this guy. And the problem with Christopher Cooper is an Obama-appointed judge. So I can't see how he can really fairly preside over these sort of cases.
Is there a distinction in all of this between the enemy combatants that we had at Guantanamo Bay and the attackers of Benghazi?
There seems to be a distinction because the guys in Guantanamo seem to face a little bit more of a hefty sentence, but it's maddening, obviously. Well, I want the president to turn all future terrorist trials over to a military tribunal structure.
What's particularly interesting, and this really went completely unnoticed, Michael, and that is that Trump signed an executive order to keep Guantanamo Bay open. Okay, we got that one. But it was just a couple of months ago, 2 months ago, I think, that Trump signed with the Department of Defense an $829 million contract. Let me say it again. An $829 million contract with the German company by the name of Siemens to enhance all systems at Guantanamo. Now that means it includes improved energy efficiency, reliability, upgrades, lighting, refrigeration, security, supply side stuff, power control. I mean, all these other kinds of things, wastewater and whatnot. So that's not a small contract. Now, what I guess I'm saying here is Guantanamo is not going away. So not only do we have enemy combatants, I would argue, that really don't have any distinction between Benghazi and any of those with Al-Qaeda or Taliban or Islamic State. Guantanamo is ready, and we have funded it and this contract, by the way, I think goes through 2042. So, I'm sorry, 2043. 2043. Yeah. Now, the other fascinating thing here is that we've got an awful lot of Islamic State fighters. We have them in detention in Syria. We have them in detention in Iraq, of which the Kurds are helping us hold. We have still some in detention of Taliban Al-Qaeda types in Afghanistan. And we obviously don't have all of those that we should have when it comes to Benghazi. So you've written this letter. You've reached out to the Trump administration using whatever channels that you possibly can. We're not getting anywhere. What's the problem? Is it just that we're prioritizing things, or is it just that all things 9/11, including the attacks on the United States, on our homeland, and in Benghazi 7 years ago,
which was also sovereign U.S. U.S. soil.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
Think about it.
Is old news. And let's move on.
Yeah.
Is that where we are?
Yeah, that's exactly where we are. And I refuse to move on. And so does Pat Smith, and so does Charles Woods, because we want accountability. We know exactly, like we said, what happened, how it happened, why it happened. What we want to see is accountability. I would like to see Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton placed in irons, personally, because dereliction of duty is a form of treason. What they practiced that night was nights, really, when you think about it, going from September 11th, where the diplomatic outpost was attacked and my nephew and Ambassador Stevens were murdered. And then you have the attack on the CIA annex about 10 minutes away from that outpost, which is, again, U.S. sovereign soil. And, we're yet to see real accountability. And the whole problem is that the only person, everybody talks about, well, who gave the stand-down order? The only person that had the authority to give the stand-down order to say we're not going to send aid to these American citizens under attack was Barack Obama.
Mm-hmm.
Or his second-in-command, Valerie Jarrett. And they're guilty of treason. Treason is just like murder. And it's not something that you move on from.
Well, I'm with you on this, and there's still some open wounds, and as long as there is not a consequence, I would argue that those wounds for so many don't fade away. In fact, I think they sometimes become wider and deeper because there's no consequence. What's remarkable to me, Michael, is now that we have Andrew McCabe, and he and his lawyers appealed to the Justice Department to not apply any charges to him as a result of the Michael Horowitz IG report. There were 4 items in there that Andrew McCabe, formerly of FBI, violated. And he lost his appeal. So in the last couple of days, it has come out that the Justice Department denied his appeal. And so there's going to be some kind of consequence. Now, let me ask you the $64,000 question for the sake of the listeners. I think I already know the answer. And that is, if we go back to those that gave testimony on all things Benghazi, including Miss Hillary, we know that there were lies in those testimonies. And yet, here's Andrew McCabe just in the recent days, but yet we have Hillary back there in history, right?
Right, exactly. And, and here we have, like, these folks, including a current presidential candidate on the Democrat side, Joe Biden, all like saying as a litany that the Obama administration was scandal-free. I would counter that with the fact that Benghazi is a true example of an American scandal.
As was Fast and Furious, of which
That's
there
right.
has been no consequence.
Which gets even less. I know Karen and Billy Vaughn personally.
Mm-hmm.
Who lost his son in
Extortion
17. Extortion 17, Fast and Furious are just ignored. They're like blips in the screen of history. And that's a true travesty.
So here we are today. We have some new leadership at the Department of Justice, and I think we're told to be thankful for that. All right, I'm sitting on the sideline with my arms folded, and I'm ready. We'll see if that was a good choice. So far, there are indications that it is, but I have to wonder who else is at the Department of Justice that is not stepping up to the plate and following, I would argue, or being in lockstep with what AG Barr tells us that he wants to do within the Department of Justice. We've got all these open cases. Not only do we have them, festering at Justice, but we've got them festering at the Southern District of New York. And these cases don't go away. I mean, it seems as though things got complicated because we've got to bring in Jeffrey Epstein, and that's going to take up an awful lot of resources. But so what? I mean, these people are paid, they're experienced, and they have the resumes to get justice right. Is that correct, Michael?
That's the way it's supposed to be. But the problem with the Justice Department is that we're still dealing with a lot of holdovers from the Obama administration. And I think those folks need to seek other employment. They should be, shall we say, there should be a request for them to receive other, to seek other employment,
We had the separate committee in the House under Trey Gowdy on the Benghazi Commission, and we were good with that. And then when it was all over, we didn't get anywhere. And I would argue, and a lot of people are mad at Trey Gowdy, but that may be some misplaced anger because of the non-responsiveness of documents and testimonies and retestimonies at the time when that investigation was going on. So at some point, I think that Trey Gowdy just finally said, we can't go any further because there is no responsiveness.
Right.
Is it his fault, or is it other people's fault that made it look like it was his fault?
I think, yeah, and I've been I've been hard on Trey Gowdy, but I'm finding with time, and the more I study both the Select Committee's final report and go back and look at some of the things I have in my archives, I have a little bit more forgiveness for Trey Gowdy than I did in the aftermath of the release of the final Select Committee report. I find a lot of the blame to be placed on the Democrat side of that committee. Adam Schiff should have resigned. Adam Schiff was such an adherence to any process of the truth that he should have either been removed from the committee, or he should have just been man enough, which I doubt he really has, the faculties for that, to actually resign. And the same thing with Elijah Cummings, and to a degree with Adam Smith. They were a maddening hindrance to the process of justice and the process of the truth. And that's totally antithetical to what Elijah Cummings said to me when I talked to him in the aftermath of the first Select Committee hearing, where he told me that they were going to get to the bottom of it, and that, as an American citizen, you should be proud that you're standing up for your nephew, and blah, 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 Yeah, right. Okay. But so I have a lot more forgiveness for Trey Gowdy than I have in recent history, yeah. I think he was really hindered so that they only went to the 10-yard line. Mm-hmm. The problem I have with the Select Committee's report is that they never attached blame, really. When you read the 400-odd pages of it, there's really no blame attached, other than, there were requests for additional security by Ambassador Stevens, in fact, over 600 requests. And they mentioned that, but they didn't really attach blame to either President Obama or Secretary Clinton. And they should have.
And yet today, Michael, we are watching the Nadler House Judiciary Committee moving not at a speed, but with threats and lawfare, if you will, with their hair on fire in order to put all things on the table to impeach Trump. Yeah. And so I think if you compare what the Oversight Committee was doing, the Special Commission on Benghazi was doing, it doesn't compare to what Nadler is trying to do, does it?
No, not at all. Not at all. No, And when you look at the actual crimes of the Obama administration and the supposed crimes of the Trump administration, there is no comparison. it's a paper indictment at best.
Let's trot on over to like the VA, because I think we can put the VA in this whole mix.
Sure.
There is dereliction of duty. There is bad malfeasance in care and paperwork, such that you have got veterans that are dying in the facility, in the parking lot, and those that have just given up are also taking their own lives because they can't deal with it.
Exactly.
And so now we have a suicide problem, and you've got some personal experience with that too. You want to share some of that?
Sure. Tomorrow will be the 23rd anniversary of my brother, who was a Vietnam-era vet, and his completion of the act of suicide. And I'll tell a heartwarming story about President Trump. 2 years ago, in September of 2017, I wrote a piece for Politichicks called Darkness in American Veteran Suicide, where I really laid out the stats, and the stats are, the media hook has always been 22 vets a day die by their own hands, right? But really what we're finding is that more vets are dying, especially in places like Montana and Utah, where there's not necessarily a great veterans hospital system. And if they're not attached to the system, their deaths are not reported under those stats. President Trump read my article. President Trump gave a copy of the article to Kellyanne Conway. Kellyanne Conway got me connected personally with the administrator of the Salisbury, North Carolina Veterans Hospital. We are now working together with the local Blues Society, and we are placing songwriters like myself with at-risk vets. And what we're trying to do is turn their stories into songs.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
And that all started with President Trump.
Cool. Now that's an untold story there, Michael.
Sure is. And as we get closer to it becoming into fruition, because we're in meetings and, we're meeting people and all that sort of stuff, when we get closer, I'm going to give him full credit publicly, without a doubt.
From time to time, we have some feel-good stories. I would argue that we need more of them, to the point where they are very commonplace. But now we see that feel-good stories are done on an exceptional basis, and I think that kind of speaks to where we are in attitudes and division in this country. You mentioned 22 suicides a day by veterans, and you start adding all that up, Michael, and that far outweighs, I think, some of the sadness that we could even have in these mass shootings. Is that overstating it, or is that just way out of context?
No, I don't think it's overstating it at all, because, okay, mass shootings get a huge amount of publicity, okay? And politicians then, start talking about gun control, and we have to take the guns out of people's hands. And it's the guns that are the issue. And if we got rid of the guns, we'd get rid of the lone mad gunman.
Right.
And that's just patently ridiculous. What we're dealing with is a mental health problem. And we're not addressing the mental health side of the lone shooter.
We're in a tough world here in our country, and I think that what gets reported is either distorted, incomplete, or not reported at all. Exactly. So when we look at legal consequence, we mentioned Fast and Furious, nothing. We've mentioned Benghazi, nothing. And interestingly enough, upon doing some research, I found that there's a lot of people that are very angry that foreign nationals that happen to be here in the United States are afforded the same constitutional protections as U.S. citizens. Well, the Supreme Court ruled on that. And fascinatingly enough, It was a rule that, it was a decision by the Supreme Court that came down as a result of one of the Guantanamo enemy combatants, which is the reason we are where we are today.
Right, which is why we're refurbishing Guantanamo Bay.
Well, not only that, but the Supreme Court ruling said it's not a matter of a person being a citizen, it's a matter of a person being a person in our country. So, all right. But then those constitutional protections, I think, are selectively applied when it comes to those that should have a consequence. And those are the illegals that have done some pretty horrible things to U.S. citizens, least of which is Kate Steinle's killer. And those that are released after 6 months in jail for being illegal and they have raped. Or those that have murdered, like MS-13, and what do? We just send them back to their home country only for them to keep coming back and coming back. So, Michael, this is all so all over the place. There's not kind of a lane that's got or a road that's got 6 lanes in it that they're all heading in the same direction to the same application of the law, because we do these plea deals, and then you've got other interactions and interruptions and intersections that complicate things. Do we allow these complications to happen almost purposely out of political correctness?
Oh, yeah. Because, and political correctness, of course, is always a shortcut to active thinking. It's easier to be politically correct than it is to actually apply the rule of law.
You need to keep writing. We've covered.
There's really no stopping now. Denise. I've been writing actively as far as politics for the past 6 years now, and a few hundred articles later, here we are. Politichicks is at least broad enough that I write about some things that are even closer to my heart. As far as social issues and music figures and things like that. But Politichicks has been, right at my back as far as supporting me in this whole process. And
I hope
we're going to keep doing it.
Good.
There's no what can you do? When you lose a family member to criminal negligence, malfeasance, whatever adjectives you want to use, in this purpose, you get a little angry.
I hope the discussion here that you and I have had is a good reminder for the listeners, because I do think that we live in a moment, because the media almost forces us to live in a moment, and we tend to forget things that have happened in the past. And maybe that some of these listeners will help do some writing or some, posts on social media to keep some of these things fresh and, in the forward part of our brains. Michael, it's been a real pleasure having you. Hate kind of the topics sometimes, but the topics themselves, I think, can have some positive effects. So, Michael Ingmire, find his work over at Politichicks. Thanks for being with us, and all of the endless energy that you have in these subjects. Thank you for all of that. And ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way on the Denise Simon Experience. So stay with us on Mojo 50.
The truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress, Mike Charlie, 435-921. Grid to mark, Mike Charlie, 4 47 tree 9er, 8-9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck, 2 rounds HEPT, gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
And thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. The Taliban, Afghanistan. Well, who do I go to when I want to discuss this? But my old buddy, my former CIA intelligence operative, the guy that's just always so smart and has written an interesting piece over at A&D magazine on the very topic, Charles Faddis. Thank you, Mr. Charles, for joining us and having this discussion on Afghanistan. Do we stay or do we go? You may have to talk me out of it because I feel like we need to stay. We did such good work at the very beginning, and then it all just went south after that. Is that about right?
I think that's a perfect summation. I think we've now covered the entire topic. It's nice to talk to you.
Why were we even talking and trying to negotiate with the Taliban in the first place when I would argue going back to Bo Bergdahl days and opening what I would call a formal diplomatic facility for the Taliban in Doha, Qatar. And we did this cockamamie trade with Bo Bergdahl. We knew right then and there, and certainly with all of the relationships that the Taliban have had with Moscow and the continued attacks, why would we even try to have more talks with them? Help me with that.
I guess the short version is fatigue. Just want the conflict to end. I ultimately don't have so much of an issue with the concept of talking to the Taliban, but I feel like it's a question of what the basis is on which we're talking to the Taliban. If we're winning and we're bringing the war to a successful conclusion, and the Taliban is talking to us because the alternative is unacceptable to them because of the level of pain we're inflicting, then I think those are potentially productive talks. If you're talking to the Taliban and it's transparently obvious that the reason you're talking is because you're tired of fighting, want to quit, and just want to go home, I don't even know what the point is to talking to them. I mean, I wrote a piece, not this most recent one, but one some time back, where I drew the parallel between these peace negotiations and what we did in Vietnam, where we just signed a piece of paper to put a fig leaf on something, left as fast as we were gone. The North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong ignored everything in the peace agreement, ran roughshod over South Vietnam, and we just acted like, we didn't notice. So to me, the fundamental issue is remembering why we went to Afghanistan and focusing on defining victory and then winning on those terms. I mean, you can't sort of win a war until you establish what victory is. And as you noted, when we went in late 2001, actually, I mean, the first guys were on the ground in less than 2 weeks after 9/11. 15 days after 9/11. We had a laser focus, crush the Taliban, drive Al-Qaeda out. The place can't be a safe haven for terrorist groups anymore. Then we spent almost 2 decades trying to turn it into Switzerland and Central Asia, pouring $1 trillion down a rat hole, pursuing every ridiculous project under the sun, and some that even when you read about them, you can't believe they're true. And that's where it's brought us to today. We just lost our way entirely, would be my thesis.
How come two significant things in these talks, not just the most recent talks that involved Zalmay Khalilzad, but even prior to that the Afghan government was never involved, and we didn't even talk about the Pakistan Taliban, did we?
No, not really. And I mean, all of those things are problems. I would start with the fact that Khalilzad, I have zero. I have met him in the field, and I have seen him at work, and I have zero confidence. He is not the guy you want sitting at the table with the Taliban. I mean, first of all, they have, like I said, they have to come to the table because they have a reason to be forced to negotiate, not bring them to the table as, from their perspective, they're winning. I mean, if you begin on, we always used to tell people in the field, because in the agency you end up doing a lot of what amounts to negotiating, right? Mm-hmm. And we used to tell them, okay, the first basis on, you have to have leverage. If you don't have leverage, and you're not prepared to walk away from the deal, then you're wasting your time negotiating, because the other side owns you from the beginning. Everything else is just a long, drawn-out song and dance while you wait to lose. So if we give up that leverage, we basically transparently tell them we're tired and we want to quit and we want to go home. Why in the name of God would they sign a deal that we could live with? And if they do sign a deal we can live with, why would anybody believe they have any intention to abide by it?
And then we announce it that we want to go home. We announce it that we're, why we're reducing the number of forces. Why in God's name would we even announce that? Help me.
Well, I don't know, because we still don't have a coherent policy. I mean, from my standpoint, it would be this. All right, all of this nonsense about transforming Afghan society, all this other stuff, gender equality, everything else, I'm all for that. That's wonderful. It's not our job to make the Afghans live that way. If they want to live in the 12th century, God bless them. If they ever want to enter the 21st century, that's their job to figure that out. That's not why we went there. All of that nonsense, strip that out. Every guy, every gal that's involved with a project with that objective, and every dollar that's going into that, it's done. So all those people go home, laser focus, one thing. We kill bad guys. We make alliances. We get people to work with us. We have one objective. When we're all done, this will be, in whatever form it exists, a place that does not tolerate terrorists who are going to attack the United States. And if that means there's some warlord who governs a province, and he's willing, he doesn't like the central government, but he's willing to make a deal with us to that effect, then make the deal. I mean, who cares? The American people don't care what this guy is doing in whatever province in Afghanistan, as long as it doesn't translate into terrorism directed at the United States of America and our allies. So the bureaucracy, the bureaucrats, the silliness, it's done. Draw it down to people that are there for a serious objective.
We dropped a Moab 2 years ago now, and I was really kind of hopeful that would mean something, that would be the beginning of a real kind of surge in all of this. And now I'm wondering why we dropped a Moab. Are you?
At the time, I thought, okay, not like Moabs in and of themselves are going to win this war, but I thought, like you, that hopefully this sends a signal that we're done with the silliness and we're about to get real. And I have been searching for that. I mean, people talk about the deep state in Washington, D.C., and a lot of times I think they think that's only the people like Brennan and Comey involved in this coup against the president. And I don't think they understand that way beyond those kind of people, there's a whole other strata of folks who basically, they aren't necessarily even Democrats. They just kind of want the status quo to continue to exist. They are big government types. They are opposed to President Trump's populist agenda. They're generally opposed to change. And they're really, really good at dragging their feet and slow rolling things and preventing us from actually making any significant change. I mean, look, the Brits went down this road with Afghanistan, well over 100 years ago. Mm-hmm. Well, the first time they marched into Afghanistan, I think, was the 1840s, if I remember. Maybe 1830s. After a couple of attempts to basically conquer Afghanistan and hold Afghanistan, they recognized basically they came to the conclusion, not that it can't be done, but it's definitely not worth the trouble. It's not worth the blood and treasure. There's nothing there worth going to that much trouble over. And so they laser focused on what they cared about, which is basically keeping the Afghans from coming down into the populated areas of what was then British India, what we would call Pakistan now, and causing trouble. And so basically they reached a deal, and the deal was you stay out of Delhi and Lahore and all those places, and we'll be good. And we'll leave some political agents up here, which would be what we would call now CIA guys. And they might even hand you some money every month to cover your expenses and make sure you do us favors when we need them. And what you do beyond that with your people and your goats, we don't care. On the other hand, if you do cause problems for us and come down into the settled areas, we will return and burn every village and every town to the ground, rain fire and brimstone on your heads, and destroy you. And once they got into that mode, they really didn't have any problems with the Afghans anymore. They had an understanding. And, some version of that is basically what I'm arguing for. Enough with the nation building and the silliness and the spending $1 trillion of taxpayers' money that we don't have and getting American men and women killed in Afghanistan. Let's remember why we went there. And honestly, frankly, you could hunt the Taliban for a long time with a handful of Americans and Afghan forces working directly from us. The agency does it, by the way, very effectively in Afghanistan right now, using exactly that model. And the Taliban is terrified of those guys.
Sam, did we make some kind of a mistake thinking that the Afghanis would be somewhat like the Iraqis, that they would want to necessarily fight for themselves? I mean, something seems that we kind of make these comparisons, or at least I do, and it could be wrong-headed, that at least when it came to Islamic State, the Iraqis wanted to fight for themselves and did for the most part, although I would argue that, so much of that is we helped the Iraqis fight the war for Iran, but that's a whole topic for another day. And yet the Afghanis, we've given them planes and we've given them military equipment, and they just can't seem to turn that corner. So was that a big mistake, thinking that we could kind of hold their hand and bring them along?
Well, in Iraq, basically, as you suggested with your reference to Iran, at some point after we occupied the place and the civil war erupted, we effectively took sides with the Shia. And from that point on, first we fought a civil war against the Shia, but then ultimately with a Shia government to crush a Sunni insurgency. So we sort of took sides in that, and because the Islamic State was the immediate target, the near target in military terms. In Afghanistan, we haven't done anything like that. Mm-hmm. We're trying to mold a central government, but it's unclear what that central government's constituency is. We're trying to support a central government, first of all, in a place that is only arguably a country to begin with. It doesn't really, people around the country don't really think of themselves in those terms. And they certainly don't pay any attention to a central government and never have. So you're trying to support a government as if they have a legitimacy, some sort of foundation to stand on, but they don't, and they never have had. And if anything, we've kind of gotten on the wrong side in many cases of this division. I'm not arguing in favor of the Taliban, but the Taliban basically also flies the flag of being the force for the Pashtuns in Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. And we have ended up sort of being tarred as being the folks who are opposed to that and are going to oppress the Pashtuns and put them under the control of other people and other minority groups. So, I don't think I don't think on the day, if you win this war in the sense that you're leaving Afghanistan and we have a stable situation where Al-Qaeda will no longer be welcome, etc., you will not leave behind an organized, coherent country with a central government that really controls all the territory. I think that's just, there's one of the many fallacies. You will still have very large portions of that country, which even if they sort of pay allegiance to Kabul, it's a fig leaf. And they will effectively be under the control of some local guy who call a war. That's the reality. So stop trying to pretend otherwise. And by the way, I don't know why we have to fight all of those guys if we can reach an agreement with them. If we have inflicted enough pain that they are willing to talk to us, and we tell them, look, this is all I really care about, man.
Mm-hmm.
No Al-Qaeda guys here, no terrorism, don't blow up New York anymore. What you do out here in the wasteland is irrelevant to me. If we can strike that deal with some guy, why do I care if he really doesn't listen to the president in Kabul? Why does that matter to me? How did that become our objective, to make them into a nation? I mean, and by the way, if we're going to do this, now that I'm rambling, after we're all done with Afghanistan, with that task, there's about 100 other countries behind them that also need fixed. So, are we going to go fix all of those too? I don't know.
Well, we had, some coalition friends that went into Afghanistan with us, and it appears that we don't have those anymore because they got war weary. And right now, it's almost like we're just kind of maintaining some kind of status quo. And I would also argue inside Afghanistan, we had the Northern Alliance, and as you mentioned, the Pashtuns. We don't have the Northern Alliance anymore, so we really don't have anybody that's kind of there with us. We're just kind of, I don't know, almost just collecting intelligence, and we just hope that we're putting in a bunch of security tripwires in a bunch of locations so they don't do any of these car bombs. Is the Pentagon at odds with the White House, or is the Pentagon itself and CENTCOM themselves kind of divided? I mean, I see a whole divided kind of attitude towards this thing that it's almost like we've already said uncle.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, because you raised a number of issues there. First of all, I mean, just look, anybody who really thinks that our European allies or any of our other allies are going to send troops to a place like Afghanistan and actually engage in combat outside of the Brits and occasionally the French is on some kind of drugs. I have no idea where they've been for the last, ever since World War II. The Germans, whoever, the Ukrainians will periodically send troops someplace, mostly because they will actually get paid so much money for deploying the unit that they'll actually turn a profit off of sending their troops. But they won't take on any assignments that actually involve combat. So first you have to win the fight, and then they'll go into an area that's already pacified and hang out, and we'll pay whatever country it is a big chunk of money. So that's the reality, and it's always been the reality, and always will. So if you're counting on them to show up, well, good luck.
Right.
I got nothing but respect for the United States military. As you know, I was a military officer. My dad's was a career military officer. My brother's a retired Army colonel. I got colonels and sergeants and whoever in my family all over the place. My son is a combat wounded Marine infantry vet shot in Helmand Province, yada, yada. Nothing but respect. But as they say in Special Forces, there are a lot of bureaucrats in Washington, and some of them are wearing uniforms. Mm-hmm. So you got folks in DOD who want to get into a fight and win a war. Mm-hmm. Remember how you win wars. And then you get guys in DOD who run programs and budgets and are experts with PowerPoint and spreadsheets. And, early on in this conflict, we had warfighters on the ground and guys who were going to rain death on the enemy. And then the guys behind desks came to life in Washington, D.C. In the article that you referenced earlier, an article that I wrote recently, I lost track of where I'm writing. I illustrated this with a particular program. Are you familiar with the Italian GOATS program?
I don't think so. Yes. Yes, I am.
This is the Department of Defense bought 6 Italian goats, and very expensive goats, and they flew into Afghanistan to breed them with Afghan goats to improve the quality of their wool, and then set up a whole lab and compound on the ground to test the wool and do all this other silliness. So this is the Department of Defense, which most Americans think is supposed to fight wars, but buying goats and sending them to Afghanistan. All the goats died. There's a shocker. And the program director eventually quit. And we spent $6 million of the taxpayers' money on that project. So frankly, we've burned up so much cash in Afghanistan. But $6 million is almost irrelevant.
Nothing. Yeah,
But still, it's $6 million that actually came out of the paychecks of real Americans who were looking at their pay stub every week, wondering where my salary goes. And somebody decided it was important to American national defense to buy Italian goats and fly them to Afghanistan. So once upon a time, we started this conflict with a bunch of SF guys and CIA guys on horseback and bombing the hell out of the Taliban and arming the Northern Alliance. And we're all about, as Kofa Black said, I want to see flies on eyeballs. We're out for blood, and we're not kidding. Somehow or another, a decade and a half later, or whatever it was, we're buying goats and flying them. And I don't. That's just okay. Well, that's great. I mean, if you think you're going to win a war, buy the goats and fly into Afghanistan. I don't.
Well,
anyway.
the big the other slap in the face, other than the dead goats, is that as soon as we terminated all peace talks, if you will, with the Taliban, they showed up in Moscow. So Putin has decided that he's going to show off some of his muscle and gloat. And I have a feeling that a year from now it's going to look just like today. Would that be accurate?
Well, it is entirely possible. It could also be much worse. I mean, look, I think you need a sea change. Eric Prince, who was the former head of Blackwater, now runs a different company, has floated a proposal, which has been making the rounds. And I don't necessarily, I'm not advertising for Eric Prince, and I'm not necessarily sanctioning every detail of his plan. But his plan in general says, get rid of the peacekeeping nonsense, forget all this stuff, focus on warfighting, and bring this down to intelligence people, special operations people, working with native forces. Let's bring this down to something where we're doing one thing, that's killing the people who oppose us, and prosecute the war on that basis. And part of that is to enhance the likelihood that we'll actually get somebody to the table who's serious. But part of it also is to say, we're not going to spend billions of dollars anymore. We're not going to have 100,000 men and women on the ground patrolling every inch of Afghanistan. But we're not leaving either. And basically that's a way of telling the Taliban, look, man, if I draw this down to a couple of thousand guys, some air cover, and contract Afghan forces, and all we're doing is focused on killing
change the model.
I can hunt you at that price for the rest of time. If you want to do this for 100 years, for the United States government, the cost of that is nothing, and the casualties we will take, not that any loss of life is okay, but the casualties will be minimal, and you will have a war forever if that's what you want. Now,
well said.
And then in a year or two, maybe you get people sitting at the table who will realize, holy Christ, they would say that, but holy Allah, they mean what they say. And no, I don't want my grandchildren to still be fighting this war. So maybe we should cut our ties with Al-Qaeda and get Syria.
Thank you, Mr. Sam. Appreciate the perspective. Sometimes we kind of need to have the ugly truth right in front of us. Hat tip to Sam Faddis. And ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. There's more coming your way on the Denise Simon Experience. And thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. Got the distinct pleasure of having Mark Hemmingway with us. Mark has got quite the resume in Washington, D.C. He's been over at the Wall Street Journal, and he's been over at MTV and Reason and National Review and Washington Examiner and CNN and Fox News. And he has a fabulous sidekick who has also been on the Denise Simon Experience, his lovely wife, Molly Hemmingway, who is a major Fox News contributor and the author, along with Carrie Severino, of Justice on Trial, and remarkable book on which took me, I think, about a day and a half to read, on the whole Kavanaugh hearings. But I think Mark has written probably the second most important document in Washington, D.C. of recent days, recent weeks, at least in my opinion, he has, outside of the Mueller investigation report. And he wrote a fabulous piece over at Real Clear Investigations. And this has to do with Little Miss Hillary and some of her acolytes that still seem to be simmering out there. Mark, thanks for being with us on the Denise Simon Experience.
Glad to be here.
We hear about this dossier that caused a FISA warrant, and then it had to be renewed 3 times, of all things Russian investigation, Russia collusion, Russian blah, 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 blah. But there's actually, I would argue, at least 2 other dossiers, and you're making a big reference, and rightly so, in your piece about the dossier that was done by Cody Shearer and Sidney Blumenthal and those friends helping out, I would argue, the original dossier. Is that about right?
Yeah, I mean, keeping track of these different dossiers gets complicated fairly quickly. But everybody's familiar, with the Fusion GPS, Christopher Steele dossier for the most part, which was the genesis of much of the FBI's Russia investigation. But then came out that there was a second dossier involving Cody Shearer, who was, and Sidney Blumenthal. I don't know how long your listeners have been paying attention to the Clintons, but these are 2 people that have been in the Clinton orbit, at least that I know, since, Bill Clinton's 92 run, when he ran for president. I don't know if you remember Cody Shearer was sort of a big opposition researcher. And I don't know if you remember, this was ancient history now, but it was a big deal. Someone accused Dan Quayle of having smoked pot at one point in time. And Cody Shearer was supposedly the genesis of that particular bit of opposition research. So these 2 people have been with the Clintons for a long time. And one of the things they did when Hillary was running in 2016 is that Cody Shearer traveled around Europe for months, allegedly compiling a bunch of, dirt on Trump into a second dossier. And that second dossier, Sidney Blumenthal, former White House aide to the Clintons, passed on to a State Department employee, who in turn passed it off to Christopher Steele, who wrote the original dossier, who then passed it on to the FBI. And according to former Congressman Trey Gowdy, who chaired the House Oversight Committee, the FBI cited Blumenthal's and Shearer's dossier information as potentially, confirming information for Christopher Steele's dossier. Now, if you know anything about Shearer and Blumenthal, that was very much a big mistake on the FBI's part. These are men that have very checkered reputations and have popped up in the news a lot doing somewhat questionable things on behalf of the Clintons.
Least of which, too, also included Tyler Drumheller, who is no longer with us. I think he died 3 or 4 years ago, correct?
Yeah, he died in August of 2015, which, brings us all to the third, I guess, kind of dossier, we're going to call it, which is what I wrote about. A few months ago, the FBI released a slew of public documents related to what they called mid-year exam, which was their code name for the Hillary Clinton email investigation. And one of the things in those documents was a large, very well researched packet of information about Sidney Blumenthal and Cody. Well, Cody Shearer isn't mentioned by name in these documents, although it is known that he was working on Sidney Blumenthal with a bunch of related issues, so I assume he was in there. But what these documents allege is this, which is that most people don't remember this, but the whole reason why we know that Hillary Clinton had a private email address that she was using to conduct State Department business on was because Sidney Blumenthal, the longtime Clinton aide, got hacked in 2013 by Guccifer, the notorious Russian hacker that many people think might be connected to Russian intelligence. When Sidney Blumenthal was hacked, they released Sidney Blumenthal's information publicly, and among that information was various communications with Hillary Clinton at the State Department. And one of the interesting things that came out of that hack was that Sidney Blumenthal was apparently feeding Hillary Clinton while she was Secretary of State a whole bunch of these intel reports on what was going on in Libya in the wake of the Obama administration's bombing of Libya. And these reports were apparently being compiled by Tyler Drumheller, an ex-CIA officer of, again, a somewhat checkered reputation. And we've known that this was going on for the last 4 years or so, but for a long time, no one could figure out what was their particular interest in Libya. Why Sidney Blumenthal, White House aide, and this ex-CIA guy were badgering Hillary Clinton about Libya. Well, according to these FBI documents, I apologize to your listeners.
No. You're doing just great. I like it when you guys you take over the show and I'll just kind of every once in a while.
Well, according to the FBI documents that were released, they allege, and again, I want to stress this is entirely unproven information. This is raw intelligence. But the reason why they were giving this information to the FBI, they wanted them to investigate and confirm it, was that Sidney Blumenthal was working with the CIA agent Tyler Drumheller because they were involved in a scheme to recover billions of dollars in money and other assets that Muammar Gaddafi had looted from the country when he was running it over a period of decades. By some estimates, Muammar Gaddafi had squirreled away something in excess of $66 billion from the treasury of that country. And there was this huge cottage industry in Washington, D.C. involved in asset recovery. There are even lobbying campaigns to have some tin pot dictator declared persona non grata in various international institutions so they can then go after their money. So this report provides a bunch of evidence. Like I said, none of this is proven. And it makes some assertions that Blumenthal and his friends were involved in a scheme to try and recover Libyan assets that Gaddafi had squirreled away from the country. And in the process, they had the potential to make, hundreds of millions of dollars because on the finder's fee. And this document, again, unproven, makes the allegation that the reason why they were badgering Hillary Clinton with all of this Libya information that they were compiling is they wanted to entice Hillary Clinton into trusting them enough to giving them the information that the State Department had on, frozen Libyan assets and other things like that, which would have been illegal to give to private citizens, of course. And then they could then take the State Department's information, go back to their contacts in Libya, and use Libyan central bank information to connect the dots and then start reeling in the money and making potentially hundreds of millions of dollars.
Perfect. And, I was so pleased to read your piece because years ago when we learned about Blue Mountain and the CIA complex and Benghazi and all of those kinds of things, Cody Shearer and Tyler Drumheller and obviously Sid Vicious came up on my radar. So I was so pleased that I was, kind of a novice back then, that I really wasn't on the wrong course because you validated so much of this for me. And so thank you for that. But here's the fascinating thing here is there was a pattern, Mark, and I would argue if we go all the way back to the early part of Little Miss Hillary's term as Secretary of State, and we had the very first WikiLeaks cable drop, which I spent a lot of time on Friday nights going through. She ended up having to kind of travel around the world and apologize for things that were in those cables because much of what was in those cables was personal information and innuendo and whatnot on world leaders. So it's kind of like she already had this kind of, I guess at the time that would have been another version, the first version of Deep State going on. Is that about right?
Well, I don't, purport to know exactly what Hillary Clinton was up to with the State Department, although you're absolutely right. Certainly, a lot of these leaked emails and WikiLeaks cables and things like that have, have a lot of people wiping egg off their faces here, and I think Clinton is no exception. But, I think that this episode in particular underscores some questions that no one has really answered to anyone's satisfaction. Hillary Clinton tried to hire Sidney Blumenthal to take a job at the State Department. He'd previously been a White House aide. And the Obama administration said no. Because he is too disreputable a person to have in our administration. I mean, and no one has really quite figured out, why Shearer and Blumenthal, she allows them to hang around her when they seem to cause so many of these problems and they keep popping up in the news in unflattering ways. But, on the other hand, we also don't know what they do and do not get away with behind the scenes. And so one of the reasons why I fell into this story was I've been chasing it kind of in one way or another for the last 4 years. In 2015, I reported that I did some reporting on the initial information from Sidney Blumenthal's hack that, at the time, no one really understood why they were interested in Libya, and there was no, reasonable explanation offered for it. But one thing I did uncover at the time and was able to confirm with multiple sources, including those at CBS News, which was that Tyler Drumheller, at the same time he was advising Hillary Clinton on all of this Libya stuff, he was working as a national security consultant for CBS News and 60 Minutes. And according to multiple sources I talked to, Tyler Drumheller, while he was, working with Hillary Clinton on Libya on this stuff, was also responsible for killing critical reporting on Benghazi that was being done at 60 Minutes. And so, even the people I talked to inside the news organization were, very unhappy that, to know that this was going on. But clearly Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton feel they get some benefit from having Sidney Blumenthal and Cody Shearer in their life. And if you look at the things that these people are willing to do, or the things they've been, mixed up in, it does give you pause about why, they keep them around and make you think about what the Clintons are up to.
Well, they're kind of the bag people. They just kind of, give me an order and I'll go do it. Pay my expenses, give me a $500 a day per diem, whatever it is, and I'll be happy to just dig up whatever needs to be dug up. And then sometime later, Mark, what comes out is the Panama Papers. So then then there's another cache of major documents, and I would argue that file was just monster in size, that there's documents in there that begin to, and people like you have to do a lot of this legwork, but it begins to validate some of the inferences and assumptions that are made, correct?
Well, yeah, I mean, that is true. I mean, there was over, I worked this store for months, and it's so complicated, as you probably figured. I don't remember the exact connection with Panama Papers. I mean, I think it came out that the men had formed some sort of business partnership that was mixed up in that. But the thing about this is that, like you say, this is all very complicated, and we have all these scandals. We have WikiLeaks, we have Panama Papers, and we have all this stuff, and I'm just one guy. I'm sitting here trying, spent months, in fact, years on this story, trying to unravel this, thread to try and explain what the heck is going on with the Clintons. And the reality is that, these are extraordinarily powerful people. Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State when we first learned about Blumenthal's forays into Libya and stuff like that. And while there was some good reporting by ProPublica and the New York Times, and immediately, there's no sustained reporting or effort to unravel any of this. And I think that, obviously that is explained by the fact that on some level the media is loath to look into things that would be unflattering to people who, push their preferred political agenda. And I do wish, again, I'm supporting what is in the FBI documents. Sidney Blumenthal denies these allegations on the record. These are wild, allegations in a lot of ways, even if they do seem plausible in other ways. We need a lot more people digging into this, and we need a lot more people, to engage in the kind of, sustained investigative reporting necessary to, do this. But the thing is, and again, it isn't even just a partisan issue. I suspect that there are all manner of people, in elite business and, elite politics that are out there doing all kinds of things, and they're using the complexity as a weapon. They're using media bias to hide behind, and people deserve to know the truth. And it's not, even a partisan issue. It's just we need to know more about what's going on because I fear that people are being exploited.
Yeah, I mean, we even mentioned Benghazi, and we're told that was so yesterday, so it's kind of like we're way beyond all that, but I would argue we're not, for sure. Now, has any, I think the Gowdy had the Benghazi Commission. And then with that, I think that at some point he had to just cry uncle after having that investigative wing in the House, because documents just weren't being produced. And I think he probably took it as far as he could probably take it, his committee, because after a while, there wasn't any cooperation. So, they did publish a report. But I don't think that we still have all those documents, or all those documents that they were subpoenaing and requiring and writing letters and asking for. Did they ever just get not produced? Or did we just sort of walk away from it? Do you know?
I mean, I can't possibly imagine that we've, begun to, learn everything that there is to know about what happened there. And it is, really frustrating. For instance, when you look at, say, what the media did in the past couple of years with the Trump-Russia story, which, even from the outset, there were, even if you had doubts about Trump, and I think it was reasonable to have doubts about Trump, even from the outset, there were, there was such a furor there that was clearly politically motivated. They were leaving no stone unturned, and they were clearly chasing leads and saying that were dead ends, and they were clearly saying things about Trump Russia that was just absolutely insane. And they just went like absolutely crazy on that. And yet, here is this, we've got, we had multiple Obama administration scandals, of which Benghazi was just one, that, had actual body count.
Right.
And there wasn't even, remotely the same sort of passion among the media to get to the bottom of this. Good Americans gave their lives in defense of this country in Benghazi. And, the media, used to mock. You'd go on Twitter and they would mock people for, expressing, complaints about the way that Hillary Clinton had handled Benghazi. They would mock the idea that Hillary Clinton did something wrong there as a conspiracy theory. When the reality is, as you point out, there's a lot more there that we have never learned and could still learn. So, again, I hope that, stories like this that I've done that are very detailed and, are begging for more and more reporters to poke around in, and, not just that, like are based on, reams of actually publicly available documents. I hope that, when people hear this sort of thing that, they look into it themselves. And I don't just say that you don't have to have journalistic training,
Right.
You can read, your listeners can read the Mueller report. Your listeners can look at the FBI documents. I mean, you're as much a matter of accountability as, quote unquote, trained journalists. So I hope that people, do digging.
Well, there's one person too that seems to have escaped all of this, that has been kind of a burr in my saddle. And that was the ambassador to Libya before Stevens, and that is Ambassador Gene Kretz. And nobody's talked to the man. And, he's been around a long time. And, he also speaks several languages, Arabic, Adari, Urdu, Chinese. So, he had a very valuable role at the State Department. And I think a lot of what led up to all things Benghazi before Ambassador Stevens, Gene Kretz knew about too. So it's kind of like, where has he been? Has he crossed your radar, Mark?
I don't know the first thing about that. I mean, okay. What I do know, and there's a lot of evidence to suggest that, when Chris Stevens and all the Benghazi stuff went down, that there was, something happening there that was, some kind of top secret intel matter, and clearly we don't know a lot about it. And we also know that Libya was a hub for Al Qaeda and organized crime and all this other stuff. So again, it's just another example of this is a situation where people mock the idea that here we are. I guess it's 7 years, just almost exactly 7 years after Benghazi, and we still don't know even a lot of basic information about what happened. And the media mocks people who say, "Oh, well, we should look into this more," and there are reasons that we should do this to hold people accountable and make sure that more American citizens don't die in incidents like this.
Well, it's also choreographed, and to kind of connect the dots and do the push pins and the little strings. It would take a fleet of people of your talent, way beyond mine, although I certainly tried. For going from the Benghazi issue to the mid-year exam to the dossiers to Fusion GPS to the lawyers, and when you really look at a lot of the things that Hillary did at the time that she was Secretary of State, including, I think, at one point, Bill Clinton went over to North Korea to retrieve 2 journalists that had been imprisoned over there. You know that those emails were flying, and she got, she was part of those email conversations, and yet she never had a .gov email address. That is stunning to me. That is a fact that isn't resold every single day. Does that bother you too, Mark?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, again, and aside from the whole Benghazi thing, another, media in-joke was but her emails, throughout the whole presidential election, and even to this day, the idea that it was absurd to suggest that what Hillary Clinton what had done with the email thing wasn't in fact a very serious, grave matter that, we needed to take seriously. And to some extent, the media was successful in burying that. But on the other hand, tens of millions of Americans at this point in time have had a security clearance at one point or another, due to time in the military and other things like that. And, my father's a retired Marine colonel, and, I talked to a lot of military people, and you constantly hear stories about how they were, angry about this because, when they worked on that battleship, if they had, gone to the bathroom while they left, certain, plans on their desk, they would have been court-martialed. And here Hillary Clinton is, just flaunting it, all over the world, and was, by the FBI's own admission, almost certainly hacked by foreign governments, and being spied on because she refused to follow this, protocol. And then, and for all we know, it endangered people.
Well, because Hillary used people like Sidney Blumenthal and Cody Shearer and Tyler Drumheller, I think that they created some kind of a company or organization, and that turns around and gives Hillary plausible deniability if they wanted to go do asset recovery or asset repatriation. $66 billion is nothing to, kind of walk away from without giving it an earnest try. And I would argue that that's probably what is still keeping Cody Shearer and Sidney Blumenthal busy to this day, and doing it, and certainly had done it under the pressure of having the State Department cooperate as much as they could, going through the Treasury Department and the SWIFT banking system. Is that way out there to kind of assume that, Mark?
I mean, again, I don't think we can assume anything. I mean, again, this is just raw intelligence provided to the FBI. And, and a big part of the story is, in fact, why they didn't investigate this. According to I did have sources that were involved in compiling the information, and they told me they gave this information in June of 2016 to Peter Strzok's team and never heard from them again. A couple months later, it's an all-hands-on-deck effort at the FBI to pursue every lead in the Steele dossier when they know from the outset that this is a document that is, sourced with, clear partisan aims, and secondly, is full of misleading and inaccurate information. For all I know, this other report may have inaccurate information in it as well, but the bottom line is that, it seems crazy to me that you would investigate one but not investigate the other, and that appears to be exactly what happened. But then again, if you look at how the FBI behaved all through 2016, where, they James Comey's ridiculous press conference where he comes out and, lambasts Hillary Clinton for breaking the law, but then concludes she doesn't break the law. And then after he's fired, he, goes out on these speaking tours and says that, he knew that the Hillary Clinton thing wasn't an issue because, Hillary Clinton, they couldn't prove intent for Hillary Clinton. Never mind that the law, when it comes to breaking, classified rules, has nothing to do with intent. Either you do it or you don't, So, again, there's been a lot of excuse making here on all of this. And what we all have in common is that all of these errors and all of this behavior seems to only benefit one side of the political fence. The FBI did not seem interested in doing anything whatsoever to upset the apple cart with regard to Hillary Clinton and her presidential campaign. And they seemed quite eager to go ahead and tear Donald Trump and his presidential campaign to shreds in the hopes that they could find any sort of illegal activity to pin on it. and they couldn't even do that successfully.
During the testimony that Peter Strzok was giving that particular day in Congress up on the Hill, did the Republicans really miss an opportunity to inject all things Libya and Benghazi and, all things Hillary? Did they miss an opportunity?
I don't honestly know. And what I can say is that I have talked to people in certain positions of significant authority in the federal government. That's all I'll say about this. And they were both very interested and surprised to learn that the FBI had been anywhere near any of this stuff. So honestly, I mean, I think what a lot of this is like, again, this particular story was an issue that was buried in a bunch of FBI documents. And while, yes, they did release it publicly, obviously the FBI is not in any way going out there trying to incentivize people to dig into Hillary Clinton one way or the other. So the people that are high enough political appointees who have sort of the electoral authority of President Trump, who might be interested in looking at this, have been largely uninformed about it. And that's a big part of the story here. Again, we have a deep state, if you want to call it that is so big and so bureaucratic that they're very good at like burying things, such that there's no actual political accountability or oversight from the people that have the mandate to do exactly that.
Well, Mark Hemmingway, thank you for explaining all of this. And for the sake of my listeners, we're giving you a platform. Don't let this go, because, those players are still out there. And I would argue, after what they did with the Russia collusion thing, what they did with Kavanaugh, and all things that are kind of, I would say, percolating right now, we're going to have a trifecta. We're going to have something else between now and Election Day 2020. And we need to almost have our own war room so we can kind of bring these things back up and, help out the great work that Mark Hemmingway has done here. I would invite all of you, ladies and gentlemen, to go over to Real Clear Investigations. The title is Trump, Russia, and Clinton, Libya, a story of two probes in the FBI. Probes meaning, at least three dossiers. Now, Mark wrote this on September the 9th. You did get a little bit of airtime on it, but I wanted to give you a little bit more. A big hat tip to you, Mark. I'm gonna watch for part 2 of this. And I may have to tap you on the shoulder because I want to know.
Hopefully, you don't have to wait another 4 years.
Yes.
I appreciate that, and thank you for giving me the time to explain all this. I know it's complicated.
It is complicated, but all things are. So thank you, Mr. Mark Hemmingway, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us on the Denise Simon Experience for Worldwide on Mojo 50. We'll see you again very soon.